Hello and welcome to Sincerely Elvis Presley. I'm Sean. Thanks for taking the time out of your day to tune in. I really appreciate it. I want to talk this time about the movie Viva Las Vegas. Filmed in 1963, filmed prior to Kissing Cousins being filmed in 1963, but for some reason in 1964 Kissing Cousins is released before Viva Las Vegas. So they kind of do a bit of a switch. I'm not entirely sure why that is, but Kissing Cousins opens in March. Viva Las Vegas won't open until the June of 64. For me, Viva Las Vegas is by far and away the strongest Elvis movie of the 1960s. And that, I know it might be controversial, but that includes for me GI Blues, Blue Hawaii. I think Viva Las Vegas is the strongest of the 60s movies and the last really, really, really fully 100% coherent together movie that was made during the 1960s. There were still great movies after that. Particular favourites of mine are Roustabout. I really like Girl Happy, and I like Tickle Me. And as we get towards the end of the 60s and Elvis takes on different roles, we see him in things like Live a Little, Love a Little, Charo, etc. They're strong movies as well, but I think Viva Las Vegas is the ultimate package. Why is it the ultimate package? First and foremost, you've got the location, fabulous Las Vegas, Sin City, great setting for a movie. Then you've got the soundtrack. The soundtrack is by far and away for me the strongest soundtrack of the 60s. And yet, controversial again, for me that also includes Blue Hawaii, GI Blues, etc. I think Viva Las Vegas for me is right up there in my top 5. And it never fluctuates. I think it's a superb movie. Then you've got the director, George Sidney, an experienced director who'd been around musicals for years. He directed Anne-Margaret the previous year in Bye Bye Birdie. He'd done things like Annie Get Your Gun, Showboat, Pal Joey. He knew his way around musicals and he knew how to stage dance routines and that kind of thing. So that sets Viva Las Vegas apart. So you've got the locale, you've got the soundtrack, you've got the director, and let's not forget the co-star, Anne-Margaret. Now, she'd been the previous year, ironically, a star in Bye Bye Birdie, which itself was a kind of Elvis parody tale of it was inspired by a successful musician going into the army, as Elvis did. And, so there's a strange little irony there that the movie that Anne-Margaret makes straight after Bye Bye Birdie is Viva Las Vegas with Elvis, the guy that the previous movie she'd been in, kind of been inspired by and what have you. But there, anyone that watches that movie without reading everything that went on behind the scenes can see the on-screen chemistry between those two. Anne-Margaret's a match for Elvis, and the scenes just sizzle. Now, it's reputed that Elvis had dalliances with quite a high percentage of his movie co-stars, but it went considerably further with Anne-Margaret. I think there was a genuine romance there. Everything you read sort of starts to point that way. But yeah, I think it ticks all the boxes where some of the other movies from the 60s tick a lot of the boxes, but for me they don't tick every box. Viva Las Vegas, I just think, is the best of the bunch. But, yet again, good old RCA and good old the Colonel, how many times did they misstep and, missed opportunities? We talked in 1963 about the opportunity to release a non-soundtrack studio album and the fact they missed it completely. Well, this time, you get one of the strongest soundtracks of the lot from the 60s and no soundtrack album, only an EP. You think, so well, why? The only thing I can think of is that two of the songs that could have made up a soundtrack album, but even then, one of them wasn't actually used in the movie, and there was no real precedent for including soundtrack songs that were cut from the movie. Otherwise, you'd have had Danny on King Creole, and that kind of thing. You'd have had Stepping Out of Line on the Blue Hawaii soundtrack. So if it was cut from a movie, they tended not to put it on the soundtrack. So you've got two songs, You're the Boss and The Lady Loves Me, duets with Anne Margaret, that, well, for one, even if they'd both been used in the movie, I don't think the Colonel would have been happy about putting someone else on an Elvis soundtrack album, another equal vocal. He relented later in 1968, and Nancy Sinatra got a couple of inclusions on the Speedway soundtrack, but we're 4 years earlier then, it was a whole different ball game. By 68, the soundtrack albums really weren't selling, so, maybe he had to relent for that, but he probably had much more of a say. In fact, he did have much more of a say in 64. So I can't see that he would have allowed the Anne Margaret song that was used in the movie to be on there. So that could have been one of the things that kiboshed the soundtrack. But even if you take those duets away, you've still got a strong soundtrack. And we'd already seen with the Fun in Acapulco album that they happily put two bonus songs on there. And let's not forget, they had all that material sitting in the can from the recording sessions that they didn't use to make an album from not only the previous year, but also the early part of 64 when Memphis, Tennessee was re-recorded. So they could have done it. Even if they hadn't put the duets on there, they could have done it. But for whatever reason, they didn't, and missed the chance of the strongest soundtrack, that for me would have existed for the 60s. But they didn't do it. They didn't do it. Let's have a look at that soundtrack. Now, this is 2010's standard Sony Music release of the soundtrack. So it kind of puts that right by issuing a CD of the soundtrack. Now, just take a look. There's an incredible amount of glare on this one. I do apologise. See if we can get it better around there. There we go. Just take a look at that material. Now, we have got the two duets on there. And, as this is a retrospective, more contemporary release, the Colonel's not around to boo it. But, okay, if I was to be picky, I would say Santa Lucia probably isn't the strongest standalone song. Still works, though. And the Yellow Rose of Texas, Eyes of Texas medley probably doesn't work particularly well outside of the context of the movie. But other than that, what a fantastic soundtrack that is. Just awesome. I mean, obviously we encountered things like Today, Tomorrow and Forever, Come On Everybody, Nightlife, Do the Vega. We encountered those on the Camden album through the years because that's how they kind of ended up getting drip fed and released. But as a coherent whole, what a fantastic soundtrack. What a fantastic soundtrack. Another might have been another missed opportunity. We don't really get anything in terms of a booklet on this release. Earlier than this particular release, the Japanese had released this little beauty. Now, this is an amalgam of the Follow That Dream soundtrack and the Viva Las Vegas soundtrack. So, this was 1982. This was released in Japan. So it took both soundtracks and put them together. Now, it doesn't... We get the usual lyric sheet included. And from Viva Las Vegas, we get What I Say, Viva Las Vegas, If You Think I Don't Need You, I Need Somebody to Lean On, Come On Everybody, Today, Tomorrow and Forever, Santa Lucia, Yellow Rose of Texas and The Eyes of Texas. So actually we get the material that was in the movie, because of course Nightlife and Do the Vega were cut. Actually thinking about it, when I said that they wouldn't have made up a soundtrack because they didn't use songs that were cut from the movie, if you take those two, that there's no, they would have had to change that approach of not putting songs on soundtrack albums that were cut from the movie. So that probably explains why there was an only. I've just talked myself out of this. I still think it would have been a fantastic soundtrack album, but it would have involved quite a shift in approach for both RCA and the Colonel to put material on that wasn't actually included in the movie. So yeah, the soundtrack album that never was, but when you start looking at it like that, you can kind of get there. So this Japanese release only includes what's in the movie. So we don't have the 2 duets, we don't have Nightlife, we don't have Do the Vega, which is why they've fleshed it out with the Follow That Dream material on the first side of the album. But yeah, interesting little release, that Follow That Dream and Viva Las Vegas. Now we have got a sessions release, early FTD sessions release. So the usual approach with having a tape box on the cover, which, of all the, even if they'd gone with something like that, but yeah, thankfully they've learnt from that and they don't do it this way anymore. But the back is the familiar way that these sessions are produced. I've heard tell that these aren't complete, these takes, which is a shame, but it's nice to have this amount of material anyway. Being an FTD, you get your usual tape box arrangements for your discs. I think if I'm right, this is another early one. So they were going with this tucking the discs in, which thankfully they don't do anymore. Fabulous FTD booklet. And of course this picture, this is another reminder for me actually, that when we saw the films from the previous couple of years, we saw a trend of, let's start having Elvis singing to children. This is the first Elvis movie where he plays a race driver, but it won't be the last, will it? Because he's also a race driver in Spin Out, he's also a race driver in Speedway, and he races speedboats in Clambake. So they obviously like that formula of Elvis at high speed, that sort of thrills and spills of him and the jeopardy of him, will he crash, won't he crash, that kind of thing. But this is the first time Elvis is a racer in Viva Las Vegas. So as ever, wonderful booklet. It's said that Hal Wallis didn't like. I'm going to talk about Elvis's hair, but that's only in context to a quote from Hal Wallis, not my own observations. But apparently he said that it looked sort of unnatural and too rigid and fixed, so he wanted something doing. So you see, the next time Elvis films for Hal Wallis, it's in Roustabout. It's more sort of loose and freer. But yeah, he got quite a lot of stick actually from Hal Wallis. Again, what a cheek, an absolute cheek. Beautiful photographs, beautiful production. Just love Viva Las Vegas. It is right up there. Of course, the best way to view it is on the Blu-ray. I did show the Blu-ray in my Blu-ray episode. There are a couple of iterations of the Blu-ray. There's the standard Blu-ray, the special edition, and one that comes with the soundtrack album as well, which is a nice little package. So you get these sort of production dance numbers that are part of the plot, and that's where George Sidney, the director, came into his own, because he knew how to handle that kind of directing. But, look at that, just beautiful. And of course, this is the photo session, although he's got a different coloured jacket on. It might even be, no, I don't think it was that jacket, but this is the photo session that for some reason a still of ended up on the back of From Elvis in Memphis in 1969, which was a very, very odd approach. Right then, it's been a while, a couple of episodes since I've got into any books, but fortunately we've got some books to look at. So this is from Eric Lawrenson, and this is Elvis and Anne Margaret, Love in Las Vegas. This is a great little title. Quite difficult to get your hands on these days, I must admit, but let's have a look at what you get. This is the approach of this book is very much along the lines of almost like the frame by frame books that they did for Jailhouse Rock and King Creole, in that it's almost like it goes through the film in order. So you get your introduction with your cast, your opening sequence. You get a little bit of background about Elvis and Anne Margaret. You get an introduction, I believe, to each of them. So we do get, first of all, some stills of them together. Yeah, it is that jacket actually. That's the back cover of From Elvis in Memphis, isn't it? Very strange. So yeah, we get introduction, a couple more shots of them together, smouldering. Then we get an introduction to Anne Margaret Olsen, as her real name was. We get an introduction to Elvis Aaron Presley, as if we needed one. And then I think we get a bit of sort of background about the two of them before we actually get into the film proper. Just the shots of them together just fly off the page, I think. There was no other, even though I think he said that Shelley Fabares, however you pronounce it, I've never been quite sure, Fabares was his favourite co-star. I'm not sure he meant that. Was he forgetting about Anne Margaret? And good as Shelley was, the chemistry that he had in this movie is not replicated for me in any of those movies he's in, or any of the others, really. That's Elvis having a crafty cigarette. Either that or he's just about to burst into flames. Las Vegas, so we get a little bit about the background of the location, Las Vegas. The location, filming around various tunes in his latest pick, so a little bit about the soundtrack. This really is a nice book. I just wish it had been a hardback, really. So a bit about the soundtrack. And then we get excerpts from the script. And then it kind of breaks down some of the script in pieces. And then they start showing us some sequences. So here we get that Yellow Roses, Texas, Eyes of Texas sequence with bits from the script sort of included above and below, so you kind of see how it was written and how it kind of ended up, which is a nice touch. But yeah, really nice book, this one. As I say, it's not particularly easy to get your hands on these days, but if you come across it, as you can see, it's well worth it. And there's a piece, if I remember rightly, I think there's a piece towards the back from, it's sort of Anne or Priscilla, and it's a bit of a recounting from Larry Geller of the dilemma Elvis had because of his affection for Anne Margaret, but his relationship that existed with Priscilla and his sort of conflicted feelings about what to do, which I think is quite interesting in itself. If we get there, I'll give a little bit of a delve into that, I think, because if I remember rightly, it is quite interesting. So let's see where we get. Today, Tomorrow and Forever sequence. Because thinking about it, I said that we saw a few of the tracks on the Camdens. We saw most of the soundtrack, didn't we? Because we got Today, Tomorrow and Forever. We got I Need Somebody to Lean On. They kind of all ended up being drip-fed out on the Camdens. Which I suppose, you know, if you're not going to release the soundtrack, yeah, you're going to end up drip feeding them eventually, aren't you? Right, here we go. Priscilla or Anne Margaret? So, what do we say? Because this was obviously all over the newspapers at the time. They'd all got all the gossip columns and everything. Had got wind of this romance, and Priscilla was getting to hear about it. Right, so what would he do? Elvis and Anne Margaret were beautiful together. They shared an energy and enthusiasm for life that made you feel happy for them. Elvis was very fond of her and loved to make her laugh. They seemed to have all the elements for an enduring relationship, but Elvis confided that she intimidated him. She had her own very successful career, which she wasn't about to throw over for anyone, and more importantly, she was independent and wouldn't take a submissive role. Few women Elvis became involved with had that kind of resolve and sense of self. Elvis recognised that he'd never exert the control over her that he had then over a young, inexperienced Priscilla. It inevitably came down to a choice between Priscilla, someone Elvis believed he could sequester a couple of thousand miles away whenever he wanted to enjoy his freedom, and Anne Margaret, who challenged him, if only because her life didn't revolve around his. It was a challenge he never rose to with any woman. Several hours after Anne Margaret left the lot, Elvis and I retreated back to his dressing room between scenes. Elvis didn't waste a minute, plunging right into what was foremost on his mind. Lawrence, it's between Anne and Priscilla. And what's really strange is that they look so much alike, almost like sisters. But to tell you the truth, I don't think things would work out with Anne and me. Two egos like ours, two careers. There's bound to be conflicts. I really care for her, but to tell you the truth, I really don't think it would be a lasting thing. That's Larry Geller's account, but we know how it ended. And it's interesting to think how different it might have been had he made a different choice. But I'll leave you to contemplate that one. But yeah, great little book. Well worth picking up if you can. Now, this is Joe Tunzi's Viva Las Vegas book, and there is an incredible amount of play going on today. Of course, this is hardback. This is another quality production. This one, I'd say, does turn up a bit more frequently than the Lawrenson one. I do love it. I do love a hardback, I've said before. I think they're a lot more durable, but this is a lot more colourful in its layout than the Lawrenson one. But, you know, both equally great records of a fantastic movie. If you fancy getting this one, if you keep your eyes out, it should turn up. I do see, you know, copies turn up reasonably frequently, and it shouldn't cost you an absolute fortune. But yeah, as with most of Joe Tunzi's books, I think it's fair to say they are primarily photo books. So, you know, they're not super text heavy, I wouldn't have said. You do get some bits of text, but by and large they are photo books. That's how they set their stall out. And, you know, what can you say? It's just, I'm so glad that this movie was made, because it really is a fine movie, and it, you know, it's probably one that the general public, most people know Viva Las Vegas. They know the song. It's you. Whenever people talk about Vegas, even when you get things like Formula One racing in Vegas, you know, Elvis's song is pulled out as the soundtrack to it all. It's one of those that's very much part and parcel of the public consciousness. But whether the public know the film behind it, probably not anymore. It is one here in the UK that does quite often turn up on BBC, but I always think with movies like that, especially now we're in the world of streaming where people don't really sit around the TV waiting for something to come on in the afternoon the way they used to, you know, I wonder, you know, is it just die-hard Elvis fans that, in the main, that you watch it when it's on, sort of thing? I'm not sure. I would have said the actual Viva Las Vegas movie now in 2025 isn't particularly well known by the general public. But yeah, what a fantastic movie, book record of the movie. Of course, this one's called Viva Las Vegas, which is its true title, but here in the UK, for some reason, it was called Love in Las Vegas. So the Lawrenson book goes with that particular title. Right then, let's move on to the Big Daddy. FTD's The Making of Viva Las Vegas. This was the first making of heavyweight book and CD set that FTD brought out, and this is one of the FTD book sets that commands daft money. I've seen this go for well in excess of £1,000. Whether they actually got that, I know they were asking that. I've seen it up there for £1,500. Just crazy. I mean, it's great, and it's, you know, it's obviously very hard to get hold of, but I don't know why certain titles just command such crackers money. And you won't get this cheap unless you're really lucky. You might do. You might luck out, but by and large, this is one of the ones that people ask big bucks for. It's great, don't get me wrong. So, your heavyweight slipcase as usual, and this being the first of the making ofs, this was the first time we sort of saw this arrangement where we got the CDs in a separate sort of wallet. Now, what do we get on here? Well, we get the Viva Las Vegas soundtrack in mono, and we get the full 12 tracks that were on the CD, but we also get the Climb that isn't performed by Elvis in the movie, but is in the movie. Now, what interesting, CD2 of this gives us Memphis, Tennessee, the 1963 album. In fact, I think it says on the box, the original conceived 1963 studio album. Now, when I talked about that last time, I noticed that the attempts to kind of resurrect it and reimagine it, so the FTD's Memphis, Tennessee, the For the Asking, went as far as 1964. So that was why I said at the time, it's strange because if they're using tracks from 64, they're putting the release of the Lost album in 1964, where in my mind it was always 1963. And here they go with 63, the 1963 album. And then the tracks from 64 are put as bonus tracks. So that kind of backs up what I was saying, that actually that Lost album should have been 1963, not 1964. So they go with that. We go with the mono soundtrack, the Lost album, if you like, and then a couple of extra takes there, and then we get the songwriters' demos for Viva Las Vegas, which are fascinating. They're a fascinating listen in themselves to hear what was put forward, what was used, what wasn't used, and the way that Elvis adapts the material to himself, which I think is always fascinating in the extreme. So yeah, beautiful selection of material we get with this. And we get out 3 discs inside. So fabulous start, fabulous material. Here we go. There's the book. Superb. I will do my best to give you a flavour of what's in it. As I say, this was the first making of. This set the standard and it set the bar really high. Set the bar really high. I can perfectly understand why people are so keen to get their hands on this. Whether that is the reason that puts the price up, because I'm so glad to have it in the collection, and if I didn't have it in the collection, it would certainly be one that I'd be on the hunt for. But the prices that it commands are off the chart. There's certain FTD books that do that. You've got this, you've got Fashion for a King, Boy from Tupelo, and the Madison Square Garden. The ones that spring to mind are the ones that seem to really, shoot up, some of them, as I say, past the £1,000 mark, which is bonkers when you think about it for a book, isn't it? Over £1,000. And what was this when it came out? About, I would have said 199, maybe a little bit more than that, but these days, investing in Elvis FTD stuff like this, it's almost money in the bank, isn't it? It's like people investing in classic cars. It does make you wonder where that plateau, will they always carry on fetching that kind of money? Or will sort of bottom drop out of the market one day and, what people are paying thousands for, just won't get that kind of money anymore? Don't know, let me know in the comments what you think. Do you think we'll see a plateau eventually of the prices for this kind of Elvis stuff? Because at the moment it shows no sign of slowing down. So yeah, the usual level of detail, the usual fantastic clarity of the photographs, the high print quality, high production values. This really is a fitting reflection of the movie itself. Really nicely put together, great production values, fabulous content. It's just really hard to hold up. Ask anyone that's ever tried to hold one of these FTD books up to camera. It's a challenge. There's the concept for the outfit that Elvis wore in the Viva Las Vegas sequence itself. Concept sketch. Just fantastic stuff. The only thing I think, in some of these books is that it'd be nice if there was a bit more colour than there is, because it was such a colourful movie. You know, you think about, say, that the making of Blue Hawaii, there's a lot of colour throughout this, but we have got a lot of black and white in these, haven't we? A lot of black and white. Absolutely beautiful. And there's those photographs of the two of them together. Awesome, awesome stuff. So nice. Some movie posters from out different territories of the world. There's the UK Loving Las Vegas poster. And there we got Glamour on Las Vegas. That's an interesting one. Now, if I remember rightly, that translates as something quatrième vitesse, I think is fourth gear or top gear, fourth gear, I think. So it's like loving high gear, something like that. It's something related to the racing element. Let me know in the comments if I've just got that completely wrong, but I'm sure it's high gear or something like that. Some more posters. With the tagline, it's the go-go guy and that bye-bye gal, which I think the Colonel severely objected to. So there were a few arguments about that, I think, at the time. He didn't really like the idea that they were trying to co-bill them, which is why I don't think he would have ever sanctioned a soundtrack that had Anne Margaret's the duets with her on. And at the back we get adverts for the other FTD books, which I don't think many of the others do. And then we also get the a big advert for the coming release for That's the Way It Is 50th, which again I don't think the FTDs often tend to do. But glorious, glorious. By far the best record of Viva Las Vegas in terms of book and CD. This is a beautiful, beautiful package. Cannot recommend this one highly enough. If you ever see it at a reasonable amount and you don't have it, throw yourself at it and get it. But sadly, I don't think where we stand now, that's going to happen for some time. Not with that particular title. But there we go. Viva Las Vegas. Let me know in the comments what you think. Is it one of your favourites? Is it your favourite? Do you put it right up there like I do in your top 5? Do you think there are better movies in the 60s? You know, even aside from the kind of obvious candidates like Blue Hawaii, GI Blues. You know, are there movies that you prefer from the 60s? Do you think Viva Las Vegas is overrated? You know, let me know in the comments. I love to read all your comments. I really hope you enjoyed that look at what I've got in the collection, memorialising what I think is one of the finest movies Elvis ever starred in. Thank you for watching. As ever, I appreciate it immensely. So that was a little bit of a sidestep, just focusing on one particular movie. Now, for the next episode, I'm going to condense a few years together. I'm going to go with 64, I think, through to 66. The reason for that is if I was to do 64, 65, 66 independently, I wouldn't have enough to show. There's not that many books that pick out the particular movies that were done. Obviously, Elvis isn't recording any material that's not soundtrack material. So I would struggle to get anything more than about 10 minutes, I think. So I think if I put those 3 years together, and they really are, I think they can be put together because they're very similar in Elvis's output and what was going on with his career. So that's what I'm going to do. Next time, We're going to have a look at the period where Elvis's career kind of stagnates a little bit, and something needs to change. But let's talk about that when we get there. I hope you're able to join me for it. And until then, take care of yourselves. Ta-da.
We'll meet you again. May God bless you. Adios.